I didn't find out my family stole from my grandfather the day he died. I found out months later, by accident, when a banker hesitated before answering a question he should have answered instantly. That pause changed everything. Growing up, I believed my family was solid, respectable, the kind that talked about values at the dinner table and loyalty behind closed doors. My grandfather was the center of it all, sharp, disciplined, and fiercely independent, even in his final years. When he passed, we mourned, we cried, and we trusted that what he left behind would be handled fairly. I trusted my parents. I trusted my brother. I shouldn't have. Because buried under legal language and routine paperwork was a quiet rewrite of my grandfather's wishes, signed when he was at his weakest, surrounded by the people who benefited the most. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Families don't do that. Not mine. Not intentionally. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The transfers weren't mistakes. They were planned, timed, executed, while everyone assumed no one would ask questions. When I finally did, the reaction wasn't denial, it was panic. What followed wasn't just a legal fight. It was a social one. Smear campaigns, pressure, settlement offers meant to buy my silence, and the slow realization that exposing the truth would cost me my family, my reputation, and my peace. But once you see the lie, you don't get to unsee it. And walking away would have been easier. Staying quiet would have kept the family intact. I chose neither. The lawyer cleared his throat. However, that single word hit harder than the rest of the will combined. I was sitting in a stiff leather chair inside a bland law office, my leg bouncing uncontrollably as Mr. Hargrove adjusted his glasses and stared down at the page again. Due to a codicil executed 3 years ago, he continued, voice suddenly careful, the entirety of the estate is awarded to Brandon Carter. For a second, no one spoke. I actually laughed, short, sharp, automatic. That's not funny, I said. You just said it was split evenly. Hargrove didn't look up. It was, until it wasn't. My chest tightened. You're saying my grandfather left me nothing? He finally met my eyes. Yes, Ethan. That is exactly what I'm saying. The room tilted. I gripped the armrest to steady myself as numbers spilled from his mouth. House, lake cabin, investments, farmland, each one something I'd helped maintain, repair, protect. All gone. All handed to my younger brother. I turned slowly toward my family. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad stared at the table like it might rescue him. And Brandon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips curled into a smile he didn't bother hiding. You knew, I said quietly. Mom exhaled like I was inconveniencing her. Ethan, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder? You talked Dad into changing the will, I said. Didn't you? She hesitated just long enough to answer the question without saying the words. Your grandfather agreed it was best. For who? I asked. Brandon shrugged. Come on, man. You've always landed on your feet. I need this more. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision. They didn't forget me. They erased me. As I stood up and walked out of the office, my hands shaking, one thought burned through the shock and humiliation. I didn't go home right away after the will reading. I drove until the town thinned into back roads, until the anger buzzing in my chest had nowhere to go. Eventually, I pulled over at the old overlook near the river, the same place Grandpa used to stop when we went fishing. I shut off the engine and just sat there, hands locked around the steering wheel. The will didn't hurt because of the money. It hurt because it confirmed something I'd spent my whole life trying not to see. I'd always been second. The memories came fast once I stopped fighting them. When Brandon was born, Mom called him her miracle. I was 4. Old enough to notice how everything changed. On my 5th birthday, I got a small cake and a toy truck. That same week, Brandon rolled over for the first time. They invited neighbors, took pictures. I remember sitting on the carpet, holding that truck, realizing celebrations weren't for me anymore. School didn't change it. I brought home straight A's. Dad nodded, said good, and went back to the TV. Brandon barely passed art, and Mom taped it to the fridge like a trophy. "He's creative," she said. "He's special." I learned early that being dependable wasn't impressive. It was expected. By high school, the pattern was locked in. I worked afternoons at Grandpa's hardware store, saving for community college, smelling like oil and sawdust every night. Brandon played football, rode the bench, and still got cheers like he was headed for the pros. When he struggled in class, I tutored him. When I struggled financially, I figured it out alone. College made it obvious. I worked double shifts and took loans. Brandon got a family-funded private school education, money Grandpa quietly helped with. He partied, flunked out, and came home to sympathy. "Everyone stumbles," Dad said, passing him dinner. When Brandon wrecked Dad's car, they bought him another. When I bought my first house, a run-down place I fixed myself, Mom smiled and said, "See, you never needed us." That sentence followed me everywhere. Holidays were the worst. Every dinner revolved around Brandon's newest big idea: startup, podcast, investment scheme. I nodded, stayed quiet, listened to Dad say, "Ethan's fine, he's steady." Steady meant invisible. Sitting in my car that afternoon, it finally connected. The will wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was the logical end of a lifelong decision. Brandon was the investment. I was the safety net. I went home to a dark, empty house and collapsed onto the couch. For days, I barely moved, missed work, ignored messages. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa's confused face and heard my mom's voice telling me I didn't need help. But grief doesn't stay soft forever. One night, pacing my living room at 2 a.m., fists clenched so hard my nails cut skin, a different thought pushed through the fog. They didn't just favor Brandon, they used Grandpa. And people who do that leave trails. By morning, the sadness had hardened into something sharper. I wasn't done yet. 3 weeks passed before I finally felt human again. Not better, just functional. The house looked like my head felt. Empty containers on the counter, laundry half done. The only thing that changed was the anger. It stopped burning and started focusing. One morning after another sleepless night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and coffee going cold beside me. I typed one sentence into the search bar: "Can a will be changed if someone has dementia?" The answers weren't comforting. Most cases failed. Courts didn't care about family drama. They cared about proof, documents, timelines, witnesses, not feelings. I almost closed the laptop right there. Instead, I emailed Hargrove. If I wanted to challenge the codicil, where would I even start? His reply came hours later: medical capacity and undue influence. Without evidence, it's not worth pursuing. That stung, but it also gave me direction. I dug through my filing cabinet that night, hands dusty and shaking, pulling out old paperwork from when Grandpa fell and broke his hip years back. Hospital bills, insurance forms. That's when I found it. Power of attorney, signed 5 years ago, my name. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't thought about it in years. Grandpa insisted back then, said someone had to handle things if his mind went. I never imagined it would matter like this. The next morning, I called the nursing home. The woman on the phone was polite but guarded. "We can't release medical records without proper authorization." "I have POA," I said, voice steady. Pause. Keyboard clicking. "I'll forward this to administration," she said. "Expect delays." Delays turned into a week, then 2. Doubt crept back in. What if the records showed nothing? What if Grandpa had known exactly what he was doing? While I waited, I followed the only other lead I had, the notary listed on the codicil. Elena Vargas, local bank branch. I didn't call first. I showed up. The bank was busy, fluorescent lights humming overhead. the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. When I finally reached her desk and said my grandfather's name, her posture changed immediately. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I don't discuss notarizations. I'm not asking for details," I said. "I just want to know if he was alone." She hesitated. "No," she said. "His son and daughter were with him. That was it. No confession, no jackpot." But when I thanked her and turned to leave, she added quietly, "He asked the same question more than once." I stopped. What question? She swallowed. What the document was for. I walked out with my heart pounding. Not proof, but confirmation of a crack. That night, an email finally came from the nursing home. Records attached. I opened them slowly, afraid of disappointment. Instead, my stomach dropped. Neurology notes. Dates highlighted automatically. Words I couldn't ignore, disoriented. Memory lapses, reduced capacity for complex decisions. One entry was dated less than a month before the codicil was signed. I leaned back in my chair, hands trembling. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to fight. I forwarded everything to Hargrove. His response came the next morning. "This changes things. Come in tomorrow. We need to talk strategy." As I shut the laptop, one thought settled in heavy and undeniable. Someone hadn't just helped Grandpa sign that document. They'd rushed it before anyone could stop them, and people who rush leave fingerprints. Hargrove didn't smile when I laid the medical records on his desk. He read them slowly, pen tapping once against the paper, eyes narrowing as he followed the dates. "This establishes impaired capacity," he said finally. "But courts don't overturn wills based on condition alone." I swallowed. "So it's not enough." "It's a foundation," he corrected. "What we need next is intent, influence, someone benefiting." I already knew who that was. The question was whether I could prove it without destroying myself financially. I hired a private investigator 2 days later. Carla Ruiz didn't look like TV detectives. No trench coat, no dramatics. Just sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. We met in a diner halfway between our houses, steam fogging the windows as rain streaked down the glass. "I'm not cheap," she said flatly, "and I don't promise miracles." "I don't need miracles," I said. "I need the truth." She nodded once. "Start with money. People always get sloppy with money." That part scared me. Using the power of attorney again felt like crossing a line. But my parents crossed it first. Late one night, sitting alone in my dark living room, I logged into Grandpa's bank account. At first, nothing jumped out. Normal expenses, utilities, medical bills. Then Carla called. "Look closer," she said. 6 months before the codicil. Small transfers, regular timing. She was right. Not huge sums. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Always labeled family loan, always to my parents' account. I felt sick. It wasn't one desperate moment, it was preparation. Over the next week, Carla traced the pattern. Every spike in Grandpa's confusion lined up with financial movement. Shortly after, Brandon's account showed deposits labeled investment support. Legal? Maybe. Suspicious? Absolutely. The deeper we dug, the more resistance appeared. The bank refused to release full internal notes without a subpoena. The nursing home suddenly became unavailable for comment. One staff member canceled an interview last minute, citing family pressure. Then my dad called. His voice was tight, controlled. "You need to stop this," he said. "You're digging into things you don't understand." That's when I knew. They were scared. 2 days later, Carla sent me photos taken from public security footage requests. Grainy stills from the bank lobby on the day the codicil was notarized. My parents stood on either side of Grandpa. He looked smaller than I remembered. Head tilted. Hands folded like he was waiting to be told what to do. My chest tightened. Carla's message followed. No physical force, but clear direction. This will matter. That night, I barely slept. Because once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. This wasn't favoritism. It was extraction. They didn't just choose Brandon over me. They systematically drained Grandpa while telling themselves it was love. By morning, my anger had sharpened into something colder. If they wanted to pretend this was normal, then I'd force it into daylight. Hargrove didn't sugarcoat it. "If we move forward," he said, leaning back in his chair, "your family will turn hostile. This stops being private the moment we file." I nodded, but my stomach twisted anyway. "They already are," I said. The next step wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, and it was brutal. To build the case, Hargrove brought in a forensic accountant, Miss Lee, someone who didn't care about family history or feelings. Just numbers. We met in a small conference room that smelled like dry markers and stale coffee. Charts spread across the table like a map of damage. "This isn't random," she said, tapping a column with her pen. "Transfers begin months before the codicil. Consistent timing. Consistent beneficiaries." She looked up at me. "That tells a story." "What story?" I asked. "Preparation," she replied. "They were repositioning assets before the legal change." That word sat heavy. Preparation. Not panic, not confusion. Planning. While Lee built timelines, Carla kept digging. Not breaking laws, requesting public records, interviewing quietly, following threads that people assumed were forgotten. That's when the pressure started. My dad showed up at my house unannounced one evening. I opened the door to find him standing stiffly on the porch, jaw tight, eyes scanning past me like he still had authority here. "Your mother's not sleeping," he said. "This is tearing the family apart." "You already did that," I replied. His face hardened. "You think the court will see you as the hero? Digging through your grandfather's accounts? Dragging us through the mud?" I said nothing. He leaned closer. "Drop this. We'll make it right. Brandon can share." There it was. Not denial. Negotiation. "Get off my property," I said quietly. He left without another word. The next day, my phone started buzzing. Extended family. Old friends. Church acquaintances I barely remembered. "You okay? Heard you're going through something. Family disputes should stay private." Carla confirmed what I already suspected. "They're shaping a narrative," she said, "painting you as unstable, greedy." That night, doubt crept in hard. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how easy it would be to stop, to let it go, to be the steady one again. Then Carla emailed. Subject line, "Found something you need to see." Attached were internal banknotes obtained through a delayed request, comments I wasn't supposed to see without formal discovery. One line stood out. Customer appeared confused. Accompanying parties insisted transaction proceed. Same day as one of the largest transfers. My hands shook. This wasn't just circumstantial anymore. This was documentation. I forwarded it to Hargrove immediately. His reply came fast. "This changes leverage. We file." The next week was a blur. Affidavits signed, evidence organized, filings drafted, and then silence. No calls, no messages, until Brandon texted. "Bro, this is getting serious. Call me." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking the phone and setting it face down. Because once papers were filed, there was no middle ground left. Only truth or fallout. The filing landed harder than I expected. Within 48 hours, my parents' attorney responded, not with panic, but aggression. Motions, objections, claims that I was harassing an elderly family member's estate. Hargrove called it what it was. "They're trying to bury us in process," he said. "Delay, exhaust, discredit." And it worked. My accounts were suddenly under review. A client paused a contract. A board seat I'd been shortlisted for quietly disappeared. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just pressure. Carla confirmed it. "They're calling people," she said. "Soft warnings. Be careful associating with him." I stopped sleeping. Every win now cost something. Then came the deposition notice. Not for my parents. For me, I sat under fluorescent lights while their lawyer, sharp smile, slow voice, picked at everything. Isn't it true you were estranged from your family before your grandfather's death? Isn't it true you stood to gain financially if this will was overturned? Isn't it true you're currently in debt from a failed investment? Each question wasn't about facts. It was about tone, about painting motive. By the time it ended, my throat was raw and my hands ached from clenching. Outside, Hargrove exhaled slowly. "They're building a story," he said, "and it's not flattering." That night, Brandon finally called. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. "This is out of control," he said, voice tight. "Mom's a wreck. Dad's furious. Lawyers are draining everything." "Good," I said. There was a pause. Then, quieter. "You don't understand. They're saying Grandpa wasn't confused. They're saying you are." That landed. "They have doctors," Brandon continued. "Statements. People saying he was sharp. If this goes to trial, you think I don't know that?" I snapped. Silence again. Then, "They're offering a settlement." My heart jumped despite myself. "Split the assets. Quietly. No admissions. No court." For a moment, the room felt smaller. This was the off-ramp. The version where I walked away with money and no public war. I told Brandon I'd think about it. I didn't sleep at all that night. At dawn, Carla called. "I need you to see something," she said. "In person." She laid out printed medical visit logs. Nothing dramatic, just routine appointment summaries. But one date was circled. Same day as the confused customer banknote. Same clinic, same doctor whose statement they were now using. "That's not proof," I said. "No," Carla replied. "But it's a crack." Hargrove agreed. "Enough to force discovery," he said. "Enough to ask uncomfortable questions under oath." The settlement offer expired at midnight. At 11:47 p.m., I emailed Hargrove 2 words: "Proceed forward." The next morning, Brandon sent one final text: "You're burning everything down." I stared at it and realized something terrifying. He was right, but it wasn't me who lit the match. I was just done pretending not to see the fire. Discovery didn't explode. It leaked, slowly. Documents came in waves, emails, internal notes, calendar entries no one had thought mattered. Most of it was boring. Some of it was confusing. And then there were the inconsistencies. Dates that didn't line up. Statements that quietly contradicted each other. Medical notes amended weeks after the fact. Hargrove flagged them without celebration. "They're getting sloppy," he said. "That happens when people lie for too long." The first crack showed up in Brandon. Under oath, he stuck to the script at first. Calm, cooperative, loyal. Until Carla slid a single document across the table. A bank authorization form. His signature, dated 3 days before the codicil was signed. He stared at it too long. "That's not," he began, then stopped. The court reporter looked up. Silence stretched. Finally, Brandon said, "I don't remember signing that." Carla didn't push. She didn't need to. The transcript did the work. A week later, their side withdrew one of the doctor's statements. No explanation, just gone. Then another. Rumors started moving before facts did. A quiet mention in a legal newsletter. A forum post speculating about elder influence. A former associate of my father declining to comment due to ongoing proceedings. Nothing definitive. But enough. At a family gathering I wasn't invited to, an aunt pulled Brandon aside and asked a question he couldn't answer. At church, my parents noticed people choosing different pews. Pressure doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like distance. The hearing was set, not a trial, but a procedural review. Public record. Open room. I sat behind Hargrove as arguments bounced back and forth. Technical. Dry. Until the judge paused. "I have concerns," she said slowly, flipping a page, "regarding the timing of certain transactions and the consistency of testimony provided." She didn't rule. She didn't have to. That sentence entered the record. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter asked my father a single question. "Do you deny that your father may have been confused during these transfers?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. That clip ran online that night. Short, awkward, wordless. It changed everything. By morning, the settlement offer returned. Different terms, less confidence. Hargrove looked at me. "They want this contained." I thought about everything already lost. Jobs, relationships, a version of my family I'd never get back. "Not yet," I said. For the first time since this began, they were reacting to me, not the other way around. And once that balance shifts, you don't rush the ending. The case never went to trial. 3 months after the hearing, both sides agreed to mediation. Court ordered. Confidential, final. No cameras, no audience. Just a long table and people who no longer recognized each other. The outcome wasn't dramatic. The codicil was partially invalidated. Some transfers were reversed, others weren't. The estate was split in a way no one loved. My parents kept assets they'd already built their lives around. Brandon lost control he'd assumed was permanent. I recovered enough to make the fight worth it, and enough to prove I hadn't imagined any of it. There was no apology. There never is when truth arrives through paperwork instead of guilt. What did arrive were consequences. My father stepped down from 2 boards for personal reasons. A donor quietly withdrew funding from one of his projects. Nothing headline-worthy, just subtraction. My mother stopped calling altogether. Brandon tried once. He left a voicemail I didn't return. "Did we really have to do it this way?" he asked. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Because the question itself was the answer. Months later, I visited my grandfather's grave alone. I didn't bring flowers, just stood there, hands in my pockets, thinking about how much damage silence can do when it wears the costume of peace. I hadn't won, but I hadn't been erased either. People still talk about the case in fragments, half-remembered facts, opinions softened by time. That's fine. I didn't do this to be believed by everyone. I did it so the truth couldn't be buried completely. Some families protect their legacy. Others protect their lies. I walked away with my name intact. And that, it turns out, was the only inheritance that mattered.